It was a Saturday evening, and the grand hall of the Royal Crest Hotel looked like something out of a movie. Golden chandeliers glimmered above long white tables, and waiters rushed back and forth with trays full of glasses that sparkled like tiny stars. The air smelled of roasted meat, perfume, and polished wood. Everything had to be perfect because an important corporate party was about to start. Among the workers, moving quietly through the busy space, was a young woman named Lena. She wore a black uniform and carried a tray with both hands, keeping her back straight and her steps light. Her job was to make sure the guests had everything they needed, refilling drinks, clearing dishes, and smiling even when her feet hurt. Lena had worked at the hotel for almost 2 years. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills. Every week she sent part of her earnings to her younger brother, who was studying at a small college in another city. He was the reason she kept going. Her father had passed away when she was 19, and her mother's health had never been good since. So Lena had learned early that life didn't give you what you wanted. You had to earn it, and sometimes that meant giving up the things you loved most. Before all this, Lena had been a musician. Not just any musician, a pianist. She had started learning when she was only 6, sitting beside her father in their tiny living room. He was the one who taught her to feel the music, not just play it. "It's not about how fast your fingers move," he used to say with a smile. "It's about what your heart says through the notes." Lena had played in small competitions when she was younger, sometimes even winning. Her dream was to go to a music academy and become a professional pianist one day. But after her father's sudden death, those dreams had faded like old photographs. The piano was sold to pay debts, and she took a job at a cafe. Then another, and eventually at the Royal Crest Hotel. Now, her hands were more used to carrying trays than touching piano keys. As the clock ticked toward 7, the event manager, a sharp-tongued woman named Mrs. Dyer, was pacing around the room, giving orders in a clipped tone. "Glasses straight. Napkins folded properly. Move, move, move," she barked. "This is a VIP event, people. No mistakes!" Everyone jumped to work, trying not to draw her attention. Lena had learned to stay quiet and unnoticed. It was safer that way. She placed a tray of champagne flutes on a round table near the stage and took a quick breath. Across the room, a few men in suits were testing microphones and setting up the piano near the center of the stage. The grand piano was a glossy black, shining under the lights like a piece of treasure. Just seeing it made something stir deep inside her chest, a soft ache she thought she had buried years ago. She turned away before she could think too much about it. That part of her life was gone. Lena. She jumped a little and turned to see her co-worker, Ben, a cheerful waiter about her age. He balanced a tray full of glasses and whispered, "Can you believe how fancy this party is? Heard the boss said it's for some big company owner's anniversary. Even the mayor's supposed to show up." Lena smiled faintly. "It's always fancy. Just more work for us." "Yeah, but good tips," Ben grinned.
"Hey, you okay?"
"You look tired." "I'm fine," she said softly. "Just long hours, that's all." Ben nodded and hurried off. Lena glanced at the clock again. 10 minutes until guests started arriving. She brushed her hands on her apron, straightened her posture, and forced on the polite smile she wore like armor. As she passed by the stage again, one of the musicians cursed under his breath. "Where's David? He was supposed to be here an hour ago." "Traffic, maybe," another said. The first man shook his head. "He's not picking up. He's the pianist. We can't start without him." Lena's heart gave a small thump. The pianist wasn't coming? Mrs. Dyer appeared almost instantly, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "What's going on?" she demanded. "The pianist isn't here," said the man. "We've tried calling him, but no answer." Mrs. Dyer's face turned red. "You're telling me we have 200 guests about to walk in and there's no music?" Everyone froze. For a few seconds, the room felt tense, almost silent except for the clinking of dishes in the distance. Lena pretended to be busy polishing glasses, but her ears caught every word. "We'll find someone else," said one of the sound guys. "There must be a backup." "There isn't," Mrs. Dyer snapped. "We need someone who can play right now. We can't just leave that piano sitting there." The panic spread quickly. A few staff members exchanged worried looks. Then Ben, always too curious for his own good, blurted out, "Lena can play." Every head turned. Lena froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "What?" Ben smiled nervously. "Well, you used to, right? You told me once you learned piano when you were younger." Mrs. Dyer's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. Is that true? Lena hesitated, her palms sweating. I used to, but it's been years. I don't play anymore. Mrs. Dyer crossed her arms.
Can you at least manage a few songs?
Something soft. Anything's better than silence. I'm sorry, ma'am, I really can't, Lena said quickly, shaking her head. I haven't practiced in so long. I'll just make mistakes. Mrs. Dyer sighed dramatically. Do you think I care about mistakes right now? We need someone. The guests won't notice as long as there's background music. Sit down and play something simple. Lena's throat felt tight. Please, do it, Mrs. Dyer said firmly, cutting her off. That's an order. For a moment, Lena stood there frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Everyone was looking at her now. Some with pity, others with curiosity. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor. But she couldn't disobey. She took a deep breath and slowly walked toward the piano. The instrument looked enormous up close, its polished surface reflecting her pale face. She sat down stiffly on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Memories flashed in her mind. Her father's voice, the smell of old wood, the way sunlight once poured over her childhood piano. She had promised herself she wouldn't think about it anymore, but here she was, sitting before one again, surrounded by strangers waiting for her to prove herself. Any time now, Mrs. Dyer said sharply. Lena swallowed hard. Her first instinct was to run. But something inside her whispered to just try, just touch the keys once. She pressed one softly. The sound was pure and rich, echoing faintly through the hall. She pressed another, then another, testing the feel. The notes trembled, uncertain, but something familiar began to stir inside her chest. Before she could play more, Mrs. Dyer clapped her hands. Good, that's enough for sound check. When guests arrive, just play light music, no pressure, no pressure. Lena almost laughed. Her stomach was twisting with nerves. She stepped away from the piano as the first wave of guests entered the hall. The room filled quickly. Men in suits, women in glittering dresses, laughter, and the sound of expensive shoes against the marble floor. The party was officially starting. Lena went back to serving drinks, but she couldn't stop glancing at the piano every few minutes. She wished the real pianist would walk in and save her, but no one came. When Mrs. Dyer finally waved at her from across the room, signaling it was time, Lena's knees almost gave out. She took a deep breath, set down her tray, and walked to the stage again. The lights made her skin feel hot. She sat down once more, her fingers shaking. She stared at the piano keys for a long moment, her reflection shimmering faintly on the black surface. The voices around her blurred. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart. She pressed one key. Then another. The melody was slow, broken, hesitant, like someone trying to remember a forgotten language. But as the sound filled the hall, something inside her began to calm. The room grew a little quieter. Conversation softened. She played a little more confidently now, her fingers starting to remember the paths they once knew so well. Mrs. Dyer gave her a short nod from across the room, clearly relieved that at least there was music. But Lena wasn't thinking about anyone anymore. For the first time in years, she was just playing. The notes began to form a soft tune, one her father used to hum while fixing things around their small apartment. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she kept going. After a few minutes, she stopped and quickly stood up, embarrassed. The background chatter rose again, and Mrs. Dyer motioned for her to get back to serving. Lena slipped off the stage, her heart still racing. Ben caught her near the service counter. That was amazing, he whispered. You sounded great. She shook her head. No, I was shaky. Everyone must have heard the mistakes. Doesn't matter, Ben said. You looked like you belonged up there. Lena gave a faint smile but didn't reply. She didn't feel like she belonged anywhere. Still, something strange was happening inside her, an ache mixed with warmth. It had been so long since she'd touched a piano, yet the feeling hadn't died. It was still there, waiting quietly under all the years of dust and pain. She didn't know it yet, but that one small moment, playing a few hesitant notes at a party she didn't even belong to, was going to change her life completely. The evening carried on, but for Lena, time seemed to move differently. Every step she took, every tray she balanced on her hand, felt like it had more weight than it should. It wasn't the champagne flutes or the delicate appetizers she was carrying that had her distracted. It was the piano, Her mind kept drifting back to the sound, the way her fingers moved so effortlessly across the keys despite the years of silence. She didn't know why she felt this way. It was just a few minutes of playing, barely enough to call a performance. But something deep inside her had woken up. A part of her she thought she'd buried, forgotten. She was trying to push it down when Mrs. Dyer appeared again, sweeping through the room in her usual hurry. "Lena," she snapped, eyes scanning the room as she walked toward her. "We need more glasses at table 7. Get on it." Lena nodded and moved quickly to the nearby bar, trying not to think about the piano behind her. As she filled another tray with glasses of white wine, she noticed some of the guests glancing in her direction. A few exchanged whispers, and Lena felt her face heat up. She didn't understand why they were looking at her. She wasn't anyone important, just another waitress. But as she walked past a small group of guests, she overheard one man saying to another, "I'm telling you, she was amazing." The way she just sat down and started playing, I didn't expect that. Lena's heart skipped a beat. They were talking about her. She tried to shake it off, but something inside her felt different. She wasn't just Lena the waitress anymore. For a brief moment she had been Lena the pianist, but no, she didn't belong there. She wasn't a pianist anymore. That was a life long gone, a chapter closed. She pushed the thought away as she delivered the glasses to table 7, where a couple of guests were discussing the stock market. They barely acknowledged her presence, but as she turned to leave, the man at the end of the table said, "Excuse me, miss." Lena paused, glancing back. "Are you a musician?" he asked, his tone polite but curious. Her heart skipped again. It wasn't the first time someone had asked, but this time it felt different. "I used to be," she answered, keeping her voice neutral. "Just a hobby." "A hobby?" The man raised an eyebrow. "That was no hobby." "You were very good." "I didn't expect such talent from a waitress." Lena's cheeks turned pink. She could feel Mrs. Dyer watching her from across the room. She didn't have time for conversations about her past, not here. "Not now." "Thank you," she muttered, bowing her head slightly before quickly moving away. She didn't know why, but the words stuck with her. "You were very good." Her thoughts were interrupted as she reached the kitchen where the head chef was yelling at one of the junior waiters for spilling soup. Lena ducked into the pantry to grab more supplies. She needed to focus on her work. That was all she could do. But when she stepped back into the main dining area, there was no escaping it. The piano was calling her. It wasn't loud, not in the physical sense. No, it was more like a whisper in her mind, soft but persistent. "Play again. Just once more. You know how to do it. You know how it feels." Lena bit her lip and shook her head, brushing away the thought. She had to concentrate. She had to move past it. She wasn't that girl anymore. But when she passed by the piano again, she couldn't help herself. Her eyes flickered over to the shiny black keys, reflecting the room's lights. The sound was still with her, the way it had felt when her fingers first touched the keys earlier. The way the music had come back to her like an old friend. "Stop it," she thought, pushing the feeling aside. "You're here to work, that's all." But when she saw Mrs. Dyer pacing back and forth again, her face pinched in frustration, Lena couldn't help herself. She walked over and tried to blend into the background. Maybe Mrs. Dyer wouldn't notice her, no such luck. "Lena," Mrs. Dyer snapped. "We need more napkins at the VIP table now." "Yes, ma'am," Lena replied automatically. As she turned to walk away, a voice called out from the other side of the room. "Lena." She froze in place. The voice was familiar, but she didn't want to turn around. She didn't want to face the source of it, but the voice came again, more insistent this time. "Lena, is that you?" She slowly turned to see one of the guests walking toward her. The man was in his late 30s, well-dressed in a suit that looked expensive. He had a warm smile, though it wasn't one of those forced, polite smiles people wore at events like this. "There was something genuine about it, yes?" she asked, unsure of what to expect. The man stopped in front of her, looking thoughtful for a moment. "You were the pianist earlier, weren't you?" Lena blinked, feeling a flush rise in her cheeks. I don't know what you mean." "I just played a little." "I'm pretty sure it was you," the man continued. "I was at the front and I heard someone play. You were fantastic. I've been coming to events like this for years and I've never heard music like that." Lena didn't know what to say. Her mind was racing. She had just played a few random notes. It wasn't a performance. She hadn't even thought about it that way. But hearing him speak about it like that made the moments feel more significant than she had imagined. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head. "That wasn't really anything special. I just filled in for the musician who didn't show up." "I don't know about that," the man said with a smile. "I think you have something special there. I'm Simon, by the way." "Lena," she said, her voice quiet. Simon's eyes softened as he looked at her, as if seeing something in her he wasn't expecting. "Well, Lena, if you ever decide to play again, I hope you'll let me know. I'm a music producer and I work with talented musicians. I'd love to hear more from you." Lena blinked, unsure of whether she had heard him right. A music producer? She could feel her heart racing. This was the kind of opportunity she had once dreamed about. But that was before everything changed. "I don't play anymore," she said quickly, shaking her head. That was just a moment, but Simon didn't seem discouraged. He simply nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. But if you ever reconsider, you know where to find me." He handed her a business card and gave her a small, encouraging smile. Lena stood there for a moment, holding the card in her hand, staring at the printed name and phone number. Her chest felt tight and she tried to shake the feeling that had settled deep inside her. She didn't know if Simon understood what he was offering her. He was offering something more than a card. He was offering her a way out of the life she'd been stuck in. A way back into something she had almost forgotten. But she couldn't. She couldn't go back to that. She tucked the card into her pocket, her fingers still shaking. Mrs. Dyer appeared again, this time glaring at her. "What are you standing around for, Lena? The VIP table needs those napkins now." Lena nodded quickly, trying to focus on the task at hand. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She moved from one task to another, her mind constantly drifting back to the piano, to the music, and to Simon's words. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain. That night, something had shifted inside her. Something she hadn't expected. And it wasn't going to be easy to ignore. The days that followed the party felt strangely different for Lena. It wasn't as if anything had changed in her routine. She still worked long hours at the Royal Crest, still carried trays of drinks, still made sure the guests were well taken care of. But something inside her had shifted. A small, quiet part of her that had been buried for so long began to stir. It was like waking up from a long, deep sleep. The business card from the music producer Simon sat in her pocket, always there, a reminder of that moment. At first she tried to forget about it, convincing herself it was just a random encounter, a fluke. Maybe Simon said those things just to be polite. After all, she hadn't really played much, just a few notes to fill in at the last minute. She hadn't even played well, at least that's what she told herself. But every time her fingers brushed against the card, her heart skipped a beat. She thought about what Simon had said. "If you ever reconsider, you know where to find me." Could she really go back to that? Could she return to the life she had once dreamed of? The life she had given up to take care of her family? She wasn't sure. Every time she thought about it, her mind swirled with doubt. Despite all her hesitation, the feeling stayed. The music kept calling to her quietly in the background like a melody she couldn't quite forget. She would be lying if she said she didn't want to go back. But the weight of responsibility kept her grounded. Her brother's education, her mother's health, they needed her more than anything. Her dreams had already taken a back seat, and that was okay. She had made peace with it. The following weekend, Lena found herself at the hotel again, busy with the usual tasks. The grand ballroom was being set up for yet another lavish event. This time it was a wedding reception, and the atmosphere was different, lighter, more joyful. Guests in formal attire walked around, chatting and laughing. The waiters scurried to ensure everything was perfect. Lena moved between the tables, checking glasses and making sure everything was in place. Her mind wandered again, as it had so often over the past few days. She caught herself glancing at the grand piano sitting on the far side of the room. It was a beautiful instrument, polished and elegant, just waiting to be played. For a moment, she imagined herself sitting at the keys, her fingers dancing across them like they once had, but she quickly shook the thought away. "Lena, can you help me with the silverware?" Mrs. Dyer's voice cut through her thoughts. Lena turned to see her boss standing by a cart, glaring at her with the usual impatience. "Of course, ma'am," Lena replied quickly, hurrying over to help. As she set the forks and knives in place, she noticed a familiar face across the room. It was Simon, the music producer. He was talking to the wedding planner, and his eyes met hers for just a moment. He smiled warmly, and Lena quickly looked away, her cheeks burning. She hadn't expected to see him again. But here he was, standing in the middle of the ballroom, looking very much out of place among the well-dressed guests. He had a confident air about him, but there was something kind in the way he moved. It was obvious he was used to being around people with influence, but there was no arrogance about him. He seemed approachable. Lena didn't know what to do with the fluttering feeling in her chest. Was he here for business? Was he just attending the wedding as a guest? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he had made an impression on her. When the reception began, Lena found herself serving drinks near the piano again. It seemed like fate was pushing her in that direction. As she refilled a glass for a guest, Simon walked past her again. This time he stopped and smiled. "You're here," he said, his voice friendly. "How have you been?" Lena smiled awkwardly, trying to hide the nervousness creeping up her throat. "I'm good, just working." "Same here," Simon said with a chuckle. He glanced at the piano, then back at her. "Still haven't had the chance to hear you play again." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't play anymore," she said quickly, her voice almost a whisper. "That was just a one-time thing." Simon nodded, but there was a glint of something in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or perhaps a hint of challenge. "It's a shame. I think you've got a lot of talent." More than you realize. Lena didn't know how to respond. What could she say? It wasn't like she could just start playing again. She wasn't that person anymore. "Well, maybe one day I'll get to hear you," Simon said, as if reading her thoughts. "Take care, Lena." And with that, he walked away. Lena stood there for a moment, staring after him. Something about his words lingered in the air, as if he had left behind a door that was slightly ajar. She didn't know if she was ready to walk through it, but the thought was there. The rest of the night passed in a blur of clinking glasses and laughter. Lena went about her work, but her mind kept drifting back to Simon, to the piano, to the small spark of something that had been lit inside her. When the night was finally over and the guests had left, Lena was one of the last to leave. She stood by the exit, gathering her things, when Mrs. Dyer appeared beside her. "You did fine tonight," Mrs. Dyer said, her voice as sharp as ever. "But don't think this job is going to get you anywhere. There are no careers in serving drinks and clearing tables. You need to aim higher." Lena didn't say anything. She had heard it all before. As she walked out of the hotel into the cool night air, her mind raced. She wanted to be more than this. She wanted to do something meaningful, something that made her feel alive again. But she didn't know how to make that happen. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the business card Simon had given her. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the name and number printed on it. What if she could give it a shot? What if she could go back to music, even if just for a little while? The idea seemed both exciting and terrifying. Could she really do it? Could she really step into the world she had once dreamed of, after all these years? She didn't know the answer. But as she stood there in the quiet of the night, holding the card in her hand, she made a decision. She would take the first step. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. She couldn't keep running away from it. The next morning, Lena woke up early, her heart still heavy with indecision. She stared at the phone in her hand, Simon's number lingering in the contact screen. Her fingers hovered over the dial button for a long moment. What am I so afraid of? She wondered. She was scared of failure, scared of being disappointed, scared of being judged. But more than anything, she was scared of not trying. Finally, she took a deep breath and hit dial. The sound of the phone ringing was like a drum beat in Lena's chest. She had been staring at it for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince herself to pick it up. But every time she reached for it, her hand hesitated. What if Simon didn't remember her? What if he was just being polite? And now she was calling to disturb him. The last thing she wanted was to make a fool of herself. But the card was in her hand, and there was a pull inside her, a quiet, persistent tug urging her to take this chance. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. The fear had been with her for so long that it felt like a part of her, but deep down she knew she couldn't keep running away from what she really wanted. Finally, with a deep breath, Lena pressed the dial button. The phone rang twice before Simon's voice came through, calm and steady. "Hello?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to say, so she just blurted it out. "Hi, it's Lena, from the wedding last week." "The piano player?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Lena felt her stomach tighten. Had he forgotten? Oh, of course. Lena, how are you? Simon's voice was warm and friendly, and she could hear the genuine surprise in it. I'm good, she replied, her voice unsteady. She had no idea why she was so nervous. It wasn't like they were strangers, but something about reaching out like this felt like stepping into the unknown. Good to hear, Simon said. So what can I do for you? Lena bit her lip. She had thought about what she would say, rehearsed it in her head, but now the words seemed to escape her. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, about playing music again. She stopped herself. What was she doing? She couldn't just pick up the phone and expect him to give her a chance. She wasn't a real musician, but Simon spoke before she could finish. You've been thinking about it, huh? He asked, his tone light but understanding. I figured you might. I'm glad you called. Lena could hear the smile in his voice, and it gave her a small burst of confidence. I don't know if I'm good enough to play for anyone, she admitted, her words tumbling out. I used to play a lot, but it's been so long. There was a soft chuckle from Simon's side. Lena, listen to me. You don't need to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. Music is about feeling it, about expressing something real. And trust me, from what I heard last week, you have something special. Lena's heart raced, and she felt a flicker of hope. You really think so? I know so, Simon replied. Listen, I've worked with a lot of musicians, some of them with years of training and experience. But what sets someone apart is their ability to connect with the music. And you've got that. It's not about technical skill. It's about what you do with the music when you play. Lena was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. It had been so long since anyone had told her that. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to hear those kinds of compliments. You don't need to decide anything right now, Simon continued, but I'd love to hear you play again. No pressure. Just you and the piano like last time. Lena's mind was spinning. Could she really do it? Could she go back to something she had put aside for so long? Could she be the person who followed her dreams instead of the one who gave them up? She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't at least try, she would regret it for the rest of her life. I'll do it, Lena said before she could second-guess herself. I'll come play. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then Simon spoke again, his voice filled with warmth. I'm glad you called, Lena, I really am. I'm looking forward to hearing you again. Let's set something up. They exchanged a few more details about when and where they could meet. Simon suggested a small studio he had access to, a place that wasn't too busy or distracting. It seemed perfect. Intimate, personal, just the right setting for someone who was about to step back into something as vulnerable as music. After they hung up, Lena stood there holding the phone in her hand, her mind buzzing. She couldn't believe she had done it. After all these years of pushing it aside, she had taken the first step. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was a road she was finally willing to walk. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena couldn't focus on anything. The anticipation of what was to come was enough to keep her mind racing. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the right choice. But deep down, she knew she couldn't go back. She had to see this through. The day finally came. Lena stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She hadn't dressed up for a performance in so long. She put on a simple dress, something that felt comfortable but still made her feel like she was stepping into something important. When she arrived at the studio, her nerves were at an all-time high. The building was quiet, almost empty, except for the sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. She knocked gently on the door. Come in, Simon called from the other side. Lena took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was simple, a small studio with soft lighting and a grand piano sitting in the center of the room. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was exactly what she needed. Simon was standing near the piano, waiting for her with a smile. Hey, Lena, glad you could make it. Thanks for having me, she replied, her voice shaky. You nervous? Simon asked, noticing her hesitation. Lena nodded, unable to hide it. A little. It's been a long time. Simon gave her an encouraging nod. That's okay. Just take it slow. Play whatever feels right. No pressure, all right? Lena took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. The moment her fingers touched the smooth surface, something inside her shifted. It was like coming home. like reconnecting with a part of herself she had almost forgotten. The first few notes were slow and uncertain. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, but the music started to come back to her. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. She wasn't playing for anyone else. She was playing for herself, to find something she had lost. As the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music flowed through her, and she felt the tension in her body start to ease. She didn't know how long she played, but when she finally stopped, there was a sense of peace that filled the room. Lena looked up at Simon, who had been watching her quietly. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her feel like she had done something right. "That was incredible," Simon said softly. "You've got something special, Lena. I wasn't wrong about you." Lena smiled, a feeling of relief washing over her. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about connecting with the music, about letting herself be vulnerable again. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've got to stop running from it." Simon nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm glad you came back." Lena sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the piano, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Lena sat on the piano bench, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room was quiet, the soft hum of the city barely audible outside. Simon stood off to the side, watching her closely, a quiet smile on his face. He had been watching her for the last few weeks. Each time she returned to the studio, each time she played, her confidence growing a little more. It wasn't easy for Lena. There were still days when she doubted herself, when the weight of her past decisions pressed down on her. But each time she played, each time her fingers moved over the keys, she felt a little lighter, a little more sure of herself. The music had a way of clearing her mind, of making her forget all the doubts and fears that had built up over the years. Today was different, though. Today, Lena was going to take a step she wasn't sure she was ready for. "Simon," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking. I think I'm ready." Simon looked up, sensing the change in her tone. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice gentle. To take the next step," she said, taking a deep breath. "I want to start performing again. Maybe not for huge crowds or anything, but I want to play for people. I want to see if I can really do this again." Simon's smile widened. "That's great, Lena. I knew you had it in you. You just needed to believe in yourself." Lena nodded, her hands still resting on the keys. "I think I do now," she said quietly. "I've been playing for so long, but it's never been just for me. It's always been about what other people need or what they expect. But now, I think I want to do this for me." Simon walked over to her, standing beside the piano. "You've come a long way," he said. "You know that, right?" Lena smiled, a small, shy smile. "It doesn't always feel like it," she admitted. "There are still times when I feel like I'm just pretending." "You're not pretending," Simon said firmly. "You're just rediscovering something, and that's a beautiful thing." Lena glanced down at her hands on the keys. "I used to think I had to give it up. I thought I had to let go of my dreams to take care of everything else in my life. But now I see that it's not about giving up anything. It's about finding a balance. I can still be there for the people I love and do something for myself too." Simon nodded, impressed by her clarity. "That's exactly it. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can have both." Lena felt a small spark of excitement in her chest. Maybe it was true. Maybe she could have both. It had been so long since she allowed herself to think that way. But now, standing here in this quiet studio with the music flowing through her, it felt possible. It felt like something she could reach for. "You know, there's an opportunity coming up," Simon said, his voice suddenly more serious. "There's a small event in the city, just a private gathering. The host is looking for a pianist, someone to play a few sets. It's not a big deal, but I think it could be a good start for you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "A performance?" "Yeah. It's a chance to get back into it without all the pressure of a big show. Just a few people, a small crowd." Lena bit her lip, feeling the familiar rush of nerves. "I don't know. What if I mess up? What if I can't do it?" Simon placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You won't mess up. And even if you do, it doesn't matter. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting up there and doing it, because it makes you feel alive. You've got something real to share, Lena. Don't hide from it." Lena took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She could feel the music inside her, like a pulse, a rhythm that had always been there, waiting for her to pay attention to it again. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as strong as before. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew she had to try. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with how confident she sounded. "I'll take the gig." Simon smiled broadly. "I knew you would." The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind for Lena. She practiced whenever she could, spending hours at the piano in the studio, playing and experimenting with different pieces. She felt the familiar joy of creating music, of letting the notes guide her. But there was also a sense of anxiety that she couldn't shake. The pressure was different now. It wasn't just about playing for herself. It was about showing others what she could do, proving to herself that she was still capable of something that once felt like second nature. The night of the event arrived, and Lena stood in front of the mirror adjusting her dress. She had chosen something simple, elegant, something that felt comfortable but still special. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric down, but she told herself to breathe. This wasn't about being perfect. This was about taking a chance. When she arrived at the venue, she was surprised at how small and intimate the gathering was. The room was filled with people who were all there to enjoy the music, to relax and listen. It wasn't a performance for hundreds of people. It wasn't a high-stakes show. It was just music. Lena walked up to the piano, her heart racing, and she took a moment to glance around the room. Simon was there, standing off to the side, watching her with a supportive smile. She could see the host of the event chatting with a few guests, a quiet buzz of conversation filling the room. But in this moment, Lena felt like she was the only one there, the only one in the world. She took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. The first few notes were hesitant, but as her hands moved over the keys, the music began to flow. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when her fingers stumbled, when she wasn't sure if she was hitting the right note. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling, the way the music made her feel, the way it made her connect with the people in the room, the way it made her feel like she was home. As the evening wore on, Lena found herself lost in the music. She wasn't thinking about the people watching or the pressure of performing. She was just playing, letting the melody carry her. She felt free in a way she hadn't in years. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence in the room. Then the applause began. It wasn't thunderous, but it was warm and genuine. Lena looked up to see the guests smiling, some of them clapping softly, others nodding in approval. Simon gave her a thumbs up from the side of the room, his face filled with pride. Lena smiled to herself, a sense of satisfaction filling her chest. She had done it. She had taken the step, faced the fear, and found something she had almost forgotten: joy. After the event, Simon approached her with a grin. "You were incredible," he said. "That was exactly what I knew you were capable of." Lena felt a warm rush of gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't think I could have done it without you. You really helped me believe in myself again." "You always had it in you," Simon replied. "I just reminded you what you already knew." Lena smiled, the weight in her chest finally lifting. For the first time in years, she felt like she had taken control of her own life, of her own dreams. She had stopped hiding from what she truly wanted, and in doing so, she had rediscovered something that had been waiting for her all along. The weeks that followed were filled with small performances, gatherings, private events, and even a few open mics. Lena's confidence grew with each one, her fear slowly melting away as she found herself playing for more and more people. Music had become more than just a hobby again. It had become a part of her life in a way she hadn't expected. And as she stood on that stage, with the piano beneath her fingers and the audience before her, Lena realized that she wasn't just playing for the people in the room. She was playing for herself, reclaiming a part of her soul that had been buried for too long. The music was hers once more,